Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast for the first time in 2023. Robbie Triano, my colleague from SiriusXM and the Midwest Madness podcast, joins us. The significance of the Big 12 and the National Championship, and we're going to dare to dream. What would it mean for TCU and the Big 12 to get a national championship in the college football playoff era? All that coming up next.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You all can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You guys can follow me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. You guys can find the show on Twitter at LOBig12. And you all can find Robbie Triano, who joined me today, at the Triano Kid. Robbie, we've made it. There is one game left in the college football season, and a Big 12 team is in it. TCU takes on Georgia next Monday night. I haven't talked to you very much since the game happened, so your thoughts, your emotions as you watch the Horned Frogs take care of Michigan. And also, you're a Michigan State fan, so you double the happiness for you watching TCU beat Michigan.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because I went back home from Michigan for the New Year's and Christmas, and I got to watch that game with all Michigan fans, and that's where I really got to realize nobody had an idea that TCU was this good. Like any casual person, every Michigan fan was like, that's a fluky win. They shouldn't have got it. We coughed it up. If we played 100 times, we would win 99, and they won that one time. I knew like how good TCU could be, so I'm laughing in the corner. I was literally the only person not rooting for Michigan in that room. So it was awesome because I do hate Michigan and anything Jim Harbaugh stands for. But yeah, this is something I don't think you and I ever expected to happen. I remember coming on this show, what was it, like during bowl time or reflecting on the season saying, I don't know in the future of the Big 12 if we have a national title, contender that can compete every year. Proven wrong before we even have OU and Texas leave. This is amazing for the Big 12. This changes a lot of narratives. And honestly, I hope this changes a narrative for TCU or any school like a Kansas State or a Baylor or anyone like that, because to the public eye, those are not the programs and universities that get talked about the most or the most praise or acclaim. Now TCU is saying, you know what, you have to respect us. You have to watch us. You have to care. You have to care about our stories. And I think what the Big 12 is currently doing right now is changing a lot of narratives. And that has kind of been the mantra of this season. I feel like the Big 12 has changed a lot of way people think about this conference this season.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's not just your friends, Robbie, who don't know. People in the comments say stuff like they're scrappy. And they're scrappy to a point, but Quinn Johnston is not scrappy. Watching Darius Davis run is not scrappy. Watching Jamoy Hodge take people's heads off is not scrappy. Johnny Hodges sure is a big white dude who gets a lot of tackles, call him scrappy. But Trey Hodges Tomlinson, just locked down corner, not scrappy. And it's funny, even the national media, I've heard people call him Quentin Johnson, which is not his name. Emery DiMercado. People still don't, Max Dugan, right? People still don't know these guys' names. They don't know how the team goes. And I was even listening to some guys today, one national podcast saying, does TCU have the weapons outside of Quentin Johnston to get the job done? We just saw the backup running back go for 100 yards on 10, 15 carries, whatever it was, against Michigan.
TCU has better wideouts than Georgia in this game, to be honest.
Yeah, no, they did. Yes. Yeah. I know A. Smith just came back. That's a huge get, but I was actually previewing the game. It'll be up tomorrow with Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC host. And I was talking look, TCU's corners might get a little bored because sure, there is some vertical stuff in the passing game, but this is a diverse Georgia passing offense that really isn't all, it can be diverse because they had so many different guys, but their strength is their tight ends and guys like Ladd McConkey and Kenny McIntosh just get out of the backfield catching the football. And so it's funny. Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I'm upset people didn't get to see Darius Davis. He had honestly one of the worst plays of the game when the ball hits him square in the chest and he drops it. But guy can burn. Tay Barber, guy can burn. right? Both running backs, and then obviously Quentin Johnson. And look, Savion Williams had a really quiet game. Hudson, the freshman's been really good. I've been saying a lot of this stuff, and people still don't know. And I think what's interesting about this is that every single time a Big 12 team does well, this will reoccur. Not out of just disrespect, but Robbie, here's the reason why. I think it's because it's going to be a different team more often than not. I think because the way we've watched this league, Baylor and Oklahoma State, right? And Oklahoma State, I think the Iowa State game last year, like if they get the call in that game, and then also, Baylor, they were feet away from winning, like they were 2 plays away pretty much from a perfect season, you could argue. Right. And that could have been a team last year, right? Not sure if they were good enough to win it all, but now we're seeing it again, right? Once again with a TCU team this year. And who knows who it will be in the following years. I tend to think UCF is going to be a absolute machine in a few years just because of where they're located.
The same way, too.
A Florida team that's going to get access to Texas, that's going to play in Texas multiple times a year. Watch the hell out. It's got a massive alumni base too. But I think because it's not going to be like, we're not going to get to know Georgia's players through 3 years of being in a championship game or Alabama's players. I think it's going to be a new team. And especially when we get to the 12-team playoff era, when we will see a Big 12 team in the championship, the playoff every single year, like it's going to be a different cast of characters. So buckle up for maybe the disrespect, but people just not knowing much about the teams.
It's really interesting you say that too, because shouldn't that be what every fan base wants? If you're an SEC fan, wouldn't you want a new team getting in every year, right? A new champion? Because if you just have Alabama, Georgia winning every year, that also says something. It may not be true, but it will say the depth of your conference isn't very good. And if you just value, we want a national championship team, we want the best team in college football, okay. But for me and all Big 12 fans, I think we can respect that you can turn on any game and love it. I think it's good for the Big 12 to have a new team every year. I think TCU is a team that can compete every single year just because recruiting-wise and coaching-wise, they're going to be great.
Yeah.
But it's like a really interesting point. Like, why would that be a bad thing if the Big 12 had a different team every year? And if you just want to watch Georgia and you want to watch Clemson or Ohio State or Michigan every year, great. I think it's an amazing story. And like, I'm intrigued to see what the ratings of this game will be, because we saw Michigan TCU that rated really well. How much of that goes to Michigan? Also very intriguing as well. Side point, TCU dominated the fans of that game. Like in the stadium, I understand geographically it's so much closer than Michigan, but Michigan has like one of the biggest alumni bases. And I thought TCU fans really showed out. So I'm really interested in the ratings of this game because Georgia is this amazing team. TCU is this amazing story with not a huge brand. Is that enough for people to tune in to be one of the best or highest rated college football games? I think it should be. I think there are so many great stories. Like this is just, to me, what is great for college football. And if TCU wins, there's an argument that is the best case scenario for the health and prosperity of college football.
I think there's no doubt about that TCU winning is the better case. The one thing I'm wondering about now is really what I want to dive into is, what does that mean? What would a championship mean for the Big 12? Because, even with a win, or even with their win over Michigan, you look back at what happened in the K-State game. You look at the way, and this will matter. I think this does matter. The way Oklahoma's teams were smacked, right? Like there is a certain style of football that the Big 12 was playing, and Oklahoma was the best at it. And they made 3 playoffs and got smacked in 2 of them, lost a close one in 1 of them. But like, does the Big 12 really need this championship? Do they need this? Because all they have right now is that 1 win against Michigan. Yeah. And will people start going back to discounting the league? Will it be one nice week and Michigan, it was a fluke and Harbaugh was focused in the NFL? Or, does the Big 12 really need this to be like, no, it was not a fluke. Stop acting like it was, because it's been a whole lot of Michigan botched it. And I don't believe that's true, because I think TCU botched it just as much with their turnovers and their kind of some of the mistakes they made in the game. I think like I'm afraid of that narrative. I'm really afraid of that. And that's kind of the way national media can work. I mean, we already saw it the other day with Jim Harbaugh choking it away. And like, I don't know if that necessarily tracks, especially with the way that they beat Ohio State the last 2 years.
Here's the spin zone. If, let's say, TCU loses by 3 touchdowns to Georgia, I don't see that happening, but if they did, Paul Feinbaum, when he made that clip saying no one's going to watch a Big 12 title, he literally said, I don't think TCU can beat a team like Georgia. In fact, they would lose by multiple touchdowns. You will see Paul Feinbaum on the TV saying, I was right all along. I knew it. Michigan, fluky game. Jim Harbaugh was looking at the NFL the entire time. TCU not only needs to win this game, but if they don't, it needs to be very, very, very close, because this can change the narrative for the entire conference as a whole if TCU can win. As soon as OU and Texas left to the SEC or announced they were, everyone said this conference was for dead. I even said there's not a national championship type of team here. This is proving what we see, you and I, with our eyeballs every single time we watch this league. There is great damn football in this league that doesn't get the credit it deserves. They need to get that so people can be like, you know what, we should actually respect this conference. We should respect the football. And when it comes to Brett Yormark, I would go back to the negotiating table and be like, those numbers you gave us, they were good. They were healthy. I think we need a little bit more. And I think that's honestly why the Big 12 hasn't exactly, like, the Big 12 hasn't made an announcement on their own end on the TV side. We've just seen it from the Sports Business Journal or ESPN reports. It's not necessary. To me, it doesn't feel like it's completely locked in. If I'm Brett Yormark, I'm being like, okay, well, we just won, the national championship with TCU when there was Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. You have 28-year-old, 35-year-old Stetson Bennett, who has won a national championship against all of these great coaches. A first-year coach did this. That could be throughout the league the entire time. And also, just like Brett Yormark couldn't have picked a better year to be the Big 12 commissioner, because
Right.
I don't think a lot of this is like because of him. TCU isn't good because of him, but like he just found the perfect time to come, and it's all working for him. And I think if the Big 12 can win, the narrative around this conference can change in so many different ways. So
well, it goes back to the thing of like it being good for the sport if TCU would win, right? And look, stars matter. Like, I think the one thing I'm thinking about in this game, Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. I mean, if Darnell Washington plays, like, I don't know what TCU is going to do with those two guys. I've got no clue. I've got absolutely no clue. I'm sure Joe Gillespie's got some ideas. They're probably good ideas. They might not matter because of how tough it is for 3-3-5s to defend 2 tight ends, especially 2 tight ends like that. I mean, Darnell Washington's an absolute tank. And Brock Bowers is, maybe the best player in the country. I think people, there's that belief out there. So, that stuff matters, but there has to be a conversation about what happened, like about the way that you can make a championship game like this, the circumstances that have to happen for a team like TCU to make it. And don't get it twisted here. TCU's at a talent deficit, but it's not like they've got no talent at all. We mentioned all the skill players. Like, those guys are really good. Max Duggan deserved to be number 2 in the Heisman race. And I understand it's a season where the Heisman race was down, but like, he still deserved it. The guy dealt with the pressure from Michigan like extremely well. He was the better quarterback in that game. I think it was pretty clear. Those numbers weren't amazing, but I thought he was a better quarterback with the way, things turned out, all in all. That was a 5-star guy. So talent matters, but it's got to be coached and developed the right way. And if you develop a right amount of talent in a certain way, like, this defense is not amazing. It's not an amazing defense, but they're in a championship game. And like that, there are ways to do it. Now, if you're lining up like a Kansas State against a Bryce Young and like guys with speed like that, like, yeah, it could be really, really difficult. Cincinnati had the same thing last year, right? Cincinnati put the 3rd most players into the NFL last year, and still they could not beat an Alabama, right? They were on basically 3-man front and they got run over. Alabama had not run the ball super effectively all year. They were able to against Cincinnati. And I think that is something we have to focus on here is like, okay, what are the circumstances needed? Because there will be more Big 12 teams in the playoff. We know that, a 12-team playoff. There will be Big 12 teams that get beat, and some of them will get beat pretty badly. That will happen. That will occur again in the modern football playoff era. I think the one thing I'm trying to focus on here is like, how do we get away from TCU as a one-off, and now we're back to the Big 12 teams showing up because if you take out this TCU win, Robbie, the narrative would be, and just say it was a loss, all right, whatever Big 12 team is going to show up at the end of the year, they're going to take their lashings, and that'll be the end of it. And that's what we have to move off of. I mean, hell, maybe even a win doesn't erase that, right? People might just say that was a special case. Georgia was a bit down because they had Stetson Bennett, and maybe the 2021 Georgia team was better. But that's what I'm afraid of in all this situation. And I know I should just be happy about TCU being there, but I can't because I'm thinking about the image of the I'm almost like a press guy. I'm like a PR guy here.
Yeah.
But I think people have to understand where you and I are coming from. And I mentioned this a bunch, but like, I was afraid for my job. I was afraid for my job when we heard Texas and Oklahoma were leaving, because it's like, what other conferences will sniff around? We have 8 teams left. Will anybody want to put these 8 teams on television? Will SiriusXM cancel the channel you and I work on? Will the Locked On Big 12 podcast even matter anymore? Those things are income. Midwest Madness podcast might not ever even happen. And so, like, I know it's almost like we're pom-poms Big 12, but when our livelihoods were so tied to it, it's hard not to be. And that's why I'm so concerned about what future narratives could be.
Yeah. And we've talked about this question on Big 12 today. Like, is this season like a fluke? Like, is this a type of season that is just a complete outlier? Like, you can't really first year head coach inherits a team that everyone saw as bad, really good, had a lot of special people on this team. But what this team has and what needs to be the formula, you need really good offensive line play, and you need stars. I mean stars in like 5 or 4 stars. I mean like players who are stars. Yeah. Like TCU, I think at every single level, like every position group, I think has a player who is a star. You have Max Duggan, you have Kendre Miller, and then behind him, Imani DiMarcano is just like he was so good in that game, and like we've seen that this whole year. He's kind of like this bulldozer like type of player at running back. You have Quentin Johnston, you have D Winters, you have Travius Hodges-Tomlinson,
Johnny Hodges, Dylan Horton. Oh my God, becoming a star right before our eyes right now on the defensive line.
So they're proving that like you need to if you have this type of year, and that's why last year Baylor could have had this type of year. Quarterback wise, I don't think they were there, but they had those type of pieces throughout the entire team. But right now, I think the biggest difference maker for TCU and like any Big 12 team, really, when it comes to success, they have amazing offensive line play, and that has opened up everything for them. That has allowed them to do so many different things. Running the ball, you have to respect the run. You have to respect their pass. They are just good on every single level. And I hope that the Big 12 can not only recruit to that type of level moving forward, you have to be able to address that in the transfer portal. TCU got 13 players in the portal last year. Without that, their defense would be not as good as not as good as this at all. So I don't think this is a fluke by TCU at all. I think they are very, very good. But for the Big 12, is this sustainable? Could we have a team like that every year? I don't know, because even in this game, we're going to see like a talent difference up front. Like, we're talking about how good TCU's offensive line is. They've never faced a defense like this ever in the Big 12, and not even Michigan. Michigan could barely get to Max Duggan.
I think the one thing about that aspect, and I've mentioned this, and I think it's going to be especially true. Michigan did not appear motivated or coming in thinking that TCU is ready to match their physicality. TCU pushed them around. TCU did on both fronts. They pushed Michigan around. And I mean, there's a lot of clips on Twitter of them just pushing guys out of the way. This was a Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line. And TCU took that and was not intimidated by that. And they basically said, all right, let's see. We'll see. And the 3-3-5, I know they brought a lot of pressure. They had a guy in Dylan Horton get 4 sacks, forced fumble, right? That's pretty impressive to have that happen. They were opening up some pretty big gaps in the running game, right? They were very effective running the football. Kirby Smart's defense will not come in either side of the ball. They will not undersell TCU. I can promise you that's not going to happen, right? And so TCU, that means that they're going to have to elevate. They're going to have to elevate. But Robbie, what I will say about this formula, right? There's so many things that go into it. The coordinators matter so much. Sonny Dykes nailed the coordinator hires. And look, it's not impossible to do. right? It's not 100% impossible to do. I think this formula is repeatable, but we're not going to be every year, right? I think it's going to be like every 3 or 4, or maybe even 5 years, because it takes the right type of star players, like you mentioned. I would say the 3 big transfers for them are at center, or at linebacker, and are at safety, right? And I would say they had the coach with the right attitude. They had a quarterback who was old and experienced enough, and they nailed the coordinator hires. But in modern college football, I'd argue to Robbie, there are multiple situations that you could see playing out. Not saying 12-0, 13-1 now, not saying like that, but in terms of a composite team, I could see it playing out where you could build a team like that, and you could do it in this conference.
Yeah, and there's that like mantra, like, do stars matter? Like, obviously they matter. Like, you look at TCU is they're not going to crush that. Recruiting is very important, and getting the top talent is important. They are an outlier, really. I think they are showing how important it is to develop. But we talk about like the best coaching, and like I think TCU has the best coaching in the entire Big 12. Who else is close to that right now? I would say Kansas State. I would say that's very good. I would say Kansas, but they don't have the talent at all. Baylor is there, but this was kind of a disappointing year. Like, what staff is even close to TCU right now in the Big 12? I think there are some that are very good, but I think right now, Garrett Riley, Joe Gillespie, Sonny Dykes, like that is even Kaz Kazadi, like as their strength and conditioning coach, like they have, I think, the best staff in the Big 12, and it's not close right now, even with OU and Texas.
Yeah, I think they nailed it. And Sonny's demeanor, I think, is the perfect thing for it. And we'll see how repeatable it is. We really will. Robbie, do you have a prediction for this game?
I was going to bring this up too, because TCU has found a way to win in literally any way possible. They have, against Oklahoma early in the year, blown them out. They have, against Oklahoma State, come back and win in overtime. They have played Kansas State, were losing, got a few chances, capitalized on them. We see against Baylor, they just kept punching back and then found a way to win with that game-winning field goal, which is still my favorite moment of the whole season. And then even against Kansas State, where they lost, they just kept fighting back. And to me, I think that is an amazing experience for everyone on that team, because there's never been a point where they panicked this year, ever. And that's really important. And they're going against a team that can cause a lot of panic in Georgia. And like, even though they get so much credit for their defense, their offense is a top 10 offense statistically. And like, I don't think they get a lot of credit for them. They're facing the best team that they have played and probably will play, TCU, in program history, this game right here. So,
all right, Rob. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. What is your prediction?
My prediction for this, let's go 35-32 Georgia. I think it's going to be close, but I don't know if TCU has it.
All right, I'm saving mine for our Friday show. I will say this: the TCU fans have kept asking me to pick against them, because I said it normally goes well when I do. So I might oblige them one more time in that. All right, Robbie, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
You can find me. Big 12 basketball is back. Conference play is here. The Midwest Madness podcast is also back. So you can follow that at MW_Madness12 on Twitter. You can follow our feed, like and rate 5 stars, whatever. I'm used to this whole podcast thing. And you can follow me on Twitter at the Triano Kid.
All right. Once again, Robbie Triano, SiriusXM Midwest Madness podcast. Appreciate your time. Hopefully we're talking about a TCU Horned Frogs win next week.
I hope so too. Thanks, Josh.